I'm sure you guys know what we plan on talking about today. If you read the title of the video, we're here to talk about how I believe the CDL can improve because there's been a lot of talks recently with kind of the situation with Envoy as well as Mercules being brought up into the league that the CDL is kind of not in the place that it should be. And I think there's a lot of opinions why, obviously relating back to the Merc sentiment and the Envoy sentiment, that a big part of it is kind of to do with challengers as well. So I kind of want to talk about the entire landscape of CDL and challengers and how I believe that this can be improved upon. So that way we get a better product as fans and hopefully as players as well. Now, before we dive into those things, first, don't forget to like and subscribe. But second, I want to bring up the fact that I don't really know a lot of the financials when it comes to the CDL and things like that. And that's obviously going to play a big factor in how things can pan out and how things can change. So I'm not looking too far into that. I wouldn't look too far into that either. This is kind of just to start a discussion about maybe some ideas and things that I think could be beneficial if there's a financial possibility to any of them. With that being said, though, I would like to start off with what is probably a little bit more of a hot take when it comes to the player side of things. And that is that I believe that Call of Duty should go back to console. And I think that this is the case because, for one, playing on PC, the players aren't even actually playing on LAN. Like, even when they go to a LAN event, they're not really playing on LAN. There's not a true LAN when it comes to PC games. And I don't understand why that's the case. I'm not a big tech guy, so I don't really know how all that works. But that's one of the reasons. Another reason is I feel like there could be good sponsorships that come with playing on console. We had back in Black Ops 4, which is one of my favorite eras of COD, was that year. The league was sponsored by PlayStation. And so I know the very first event I went to, I was out in Miami, and the amount of stations that they had set up for not only just the professional players, but even at that time, it was just amateur players. It wasn't deemed challengers, but the amount of setups that they had was so much more purely because of the fact that the PlayStations, for one, are cheaper than PCs, but for two, they were sponsored by PlayStation. So not only do they get to use a lot more setups, but it's cheaper to do so. And if anything, they're getting paid to do it. So I feel like now, in order to ideally bring some money back into things, this could be a good opportunity to do so, whether it's PlayStation or Xbox. You know, the league could be more likely to get sponsored for this thing that, you know, ideally will bring in more money for them and will allow for better events, you know, just better funding overall. So that's kind of why I think they should go back to console. And I said this was a hot take because I know the players probably don't want to go back to playing on console. There's a lot that you can do on PC that you can't do on console. The quality is just better. But to me, the biggest thing is financials. And I know I said I'm not going to talk too much about it, but this is one of those things that I feel like is kind of a pretty straightforward thing. I mean, a PlayStation and an Xbox both, for the most part, are cheaper than PCs. Now, I know not to get too political here, but tariffs are kind of a thing now, so that could change things up a little bit. But either way, I feel like overall those things are going to be cheaper. And at this point, they're pretty much running, I wouldn't say the exact same, but they're pretty damn good. So I wouldn't be too opposed to going back to console. Again, as a viewer, it's a lot easier to say than it is for the players themselves, but that's my step one. I think step two I have here, I think every team should host local events. I mean, if we're going to keep the idea of location-based franchising, I genuinely believe that every team needs to host a local event. Now, I'm not saying we need to have 12 events every year and one team hosts an event. That seems way too much. But, you know, if you can split it into chunks, I think that's more reasonable. I think if we have maybe 5 tournaments a year, including champs as the last one, and then, you know, EWC is its own thing. But if we have 4 like home tournaments, you could have every team host within 3 years. Every team is going to host within the next 3 years. And I feel like if you're keeping the location-based franchising, that is a necessity. I don't understand why we went to location based franchising just to have nobody play out of their location. It just doesn't really make sense. So, if that is a priority, if that's something that the league wants to continue doing, which I don't feel like they need to, but if they're going to, there has to be a reason for it. You can't just have a location base and then not play from it or not even host an event there. Like, when's the last time we had an Atlanta FaZe event? And realistically, they're the best team in the game for the last however many years. Like, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. This year we're having two Dallas events. I know one of them is DreamHack, but still, it's like we're not really branching out and having events in different places. So it just seems kind of silly to me if we're going to have a location-based team or location-based franchises and not have events at every different location. There's people who are waiting to go to an event and they can't really afford to, maybe fly across the country or halfway across the country to go stay somewhere. Like, why do we not have more events in the places that people are fans of? Like, we haven't had a New York event in a while. I know we have had one in the past, but we haven't had one in a while. And there's people who are out there that want to go to events and they can't. Or, for me, I live in Arizona. The closest place for me would be LA. We haven't had an LA or Anaheim event in a long time. Don't know what happened to that. But we have two LA based franchises. So, I feel like that's something that has to be looked into. I think too, it'll help bring in more viewership in general because there's going to be more people who are local to those areas. And, maybe there's like billboards or something. When I was just in Dallas, Optic did that with their tournament. So maybe people see that and they're like, oh, what's that? Whether they check it out online or they end up getting tickets and they go. I feel like you're going to have more people show up if you actually have a variety of locations. Because as of right now, it feels like every year we have a Dallas event and we have a Florida event and then we have a Canada event. That's it. I feel like that's kind of all we get. So, we want to have more than that if we're going to keep this location-based franchising. That's my opinion, at least. Now, for the third thing here, I have create an academy team for all the pro teams. So, for example, League, I know, has done academy teams in the past. I don't know if they still do. I don't keep up with League too much, but I feel like the way I look at it is there needs to be sort of a feeder system. And this is where it kind of plays into the Challengers thing. Challengers isn't really a great feeder system. I think that we need to have these academy teams for all the different professional teams because it will create that system to feed into, just like the NBA has, just like the MLB has. I think if we're sticking to having these professional teams and we only have 12 of them, right? There's really not a lot of opportunity for people to be brought up from like the current state of Challengers. And we see a lot of people who are kind of like deserving. Maybe I shouldn't say deserving, but we have people who are much better than most Challengers players and maybe aren't quite at the level of the pro players. So that would be a perfect opportunity to have, 12 more teams that are all kind of like the top players in their respective league. And I think the reason this is good is because we were talking about the Envoy situation, right? Like he's saying we don't have there's not enough talent in Challengers. And with Merc coming in, everybody was kind of starting to disagree, saying, well, Merc just came from Challengers, look at him. But the point is, everybody's looking towards expansion, which we'll get to that. But you can't really expand with the talent that is in Challengers at the moment. And so I think having a feeder system would be good to bring people in, have a little bit more consistency. I think that's going to improve the talents of the people who are in Challengers. And I think it also gives more of an incentive to compete because right now there's really not much of one. And so if you're able to set up these lower level academy teams, you could have a system where like these teams scrim together more often, right? Like maybe the LA Thieves team doesn't need to bring anybody up, right? Like everybody deems them as a super team, but you have other franchises in the league right now, not to take shots at anybody, but you have teams like LAG who have been struggling all year. And if you have a franchise, like you have the franchise team and then you have the academy team, if you're able to find good academy talent, you can slowly bring them into your professional team. You can slowly bring them onto the LAG roster. And, maybe you end up finding a solid academy team that then you can bring up and they take the place of everybody on the starting roster because they're just better than the team that you have below. But it's less of a risk to do that at that point because like you see how they play against other consistent teams. I think that's something I've seen Zuma talk about is like the Challengers situation right now doesn't really make a lot of sense because they're out here talking about there's, top 20 chats. And like you said, everything's so inconsistent in Challengers. Everybody's up and down. There's team changes all the time. So you can't really tell who's consistently playing at the top just because of how much things change. So I think if you're able to set up these academy teams, that allows for a little bit more consistency. It allows for teams to actually be teams, and it allows for like again, we'll just use the example of like the LA Thieves, right? They have pretty good coaches in Shane and Sender. Maybe those two guys, if they're willing, can take a little bit of extra time to help out the academy guys, because at some point the Thieves aren't going to be able to afford their entire roster that they have right now. I mean, we saw it last year. That's why we did what we did last year, was because we weren't going to be able to afford that team again. And obviously Octane retired. That sucks. But at some point you have to kind of make changes. And I think the best way to be able to do that would be to have a feeder system. So that way too, you could even implement like trading now, because there's really not a way to trade in the CDL. Like you don't have other value outside of like just the player themselves. And for the most part, you're never going to trade anybody 1-to-1. So if you have some talent that's in your academy team and you're looking for a superstar level player, right? Maybe you say, hey, we can't quite afford this guy, but we can't afford him. We have him on the books, right? But we think it's smart to get rid of him so we can, get some more money back, maybe bring in some new young talent. And then maybe you take like Hydra or something. I'm just giving examples here, but maybe you take a player like Hydra and you trade him to, I don't know, say like Toronto has a really good feeder system, right? They brought up Scrap before. They had good academy talent in the past, whatever. Maybe they have two guys in their feeder system or in their Toronto Ultra Academy team that is like, hey, we want those guys. So we're going to trade Hydra for those two players. And now you get two players back instead of, because you're not going to trade Hydra for just another sub. Like that's not going to happen. Unless you're trading maybe like him for Simp or him for Shotzi or something like that along those lines. And even then, I feel like it's very situation based. So basically, a long-winded version of this is I just feel like we need to have some sort of feeder system. I think academy teams would be good because it allows, it allows the feeding to happen. Like you get to have players under your system that maybe down the line can be brought up. Otherwise, they can maybe be brought up to other orgs or things like that. That's why I said earlier, baseball is a pretty good example of that. There's so many minor league teams and affiliates and things like that when it comes to baseball. I think if there's any way that the Call of Duty League could do something like that, it could be pretty impactful, I feel like. But for my fourth one here is, I think if they were to do that, if they were to bring in the academy teams, we have to have Pro-Am tournaments. I think this will also allow for those academy teams and those academy players to improve, because obviously they're going to play against more consistency like we talked about before, but getting to play against the pro players, I think, is going to help them improve even more. And it'll actually show the talent. I think right now we're kind of at a place where we're missing the talent that is being brought up. Challengers is not really broadcasted very well. The CCL, I feel like I've heard a little bit more about as of late, and it seems like they're doing a decent job of trying to get Call of Duty on the map. But when it comes to Challengers, it's just like not really like, I'm somebody who covers the LA Thieves. Like I watch pretty much everything the LA Thieves do, and I try to be fairly up to date on just about everything Call of Duty. But I don't know anything about challengers, and I'll be the first to admit it. Like, I don't know ball when it comes to challengers players. I just see stuff happening and I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then I go and I look on Twitter to see what everybody's saying about it. So, to me, if you have the proams, that would be a better way to get especially people like me to see the talent that's actually being brought up or that is up and coming, to kind of put them on radar, I would say. And who knows, you could have these teams come out and have a really solid performance. And next thing you know, like two, maybe three of those players, if not an entire roster, gets brought up to an actual league spot just because they performed really well at a tournament. We basically saw that with Merc. And I think if we have a bigger scale of that, I think we would see that happening more often for those mid-pack teams that are kind of just like riding the line of, we're not sure if we want to make a change, but we're not sure if we want to stay together. So, it feels less risky to make a change sometimes. And they just stick it out and they maybe shouldn't. A team like C9 has made a couple changes and they already look much better, whereas they could have made those changes earlier, but it felt a little risky to do that. And they were kind of riding the line for a while. So they just didn't make a change. I think that would kind of improve that. And I just think the tournaments would be more fun to watch. I mean, obviously, if you have an academy team for every single league team, that's 24 teams. That might be a little too much for a tournament, but there's ways around that you could set it up to where, maybe only certain teams get in or whatever it is. I don't know. Like there's stuff you could do for that. So that's what I think you could do when it comes to adding in the academy team and having even cooler tournaments, I would say. And like I said, I think it'll help get more eyes on new, younger talent, and it'll push the younger talent to keep playing as well. Because right now, it seems like that's not really happening. So my next point is, I think that you should have the current state of challengers still be a thing, but it should be lower than the academy teams. And I think it should be more of like the open bracket, like that's the feeder into the academy. Like if you're going to have challengers, I think it's good to have that, but that's more of like that should straight up just be the passion pit. Like you're not getting paid like consistently. You pretty much only get paid if you win. And you have that be like, hey, we'll have a couple LAN tournaments every year type of thing. And that'll be a good way for like people who are looking to move up to like academy spots to have like the coaches be able to scout things like that, to bring you up into the next phase of your career at that point, if you're trying to make your way to the actual Call of Duty League. So I think having challengers be that open space is good. It allows for, everybody to kind of try it out and see how they feel and stuff like that. And you're going to get to the point where pretty much only the top players are going to stand out at that point, because right now I feel like there's a pretty big gap for the most part between the talent level of the CDL teams versus the talent level of most challengers teams. And I think that gap will still be kind of there, but I also think it will make it to where the actual talent stands out. Like there's going to be fewer people who are truly talented enough to be brought up to an academy team to work on their skills, work on their craft, to eventually, ideally, be brought into the CDL at some point. That's, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's what I feel like would be the best option, because you can't just really get rid of challengers because then there's no feeder system to the feeder system. Like you have to have a way to find the talent. And I think that would be the best way to do it, is to just kind of keep challengers what it is, but then have that academy tier basically above challengers, if that makes sense. And then lastly, what I have here is what everybody wants, and we kind of brushed on it earlier: expand the league. I think this has to be the last situation, though. This has to be the last thing that happens. You cannot have expansion happen right now because, as we mentioned, there's just not enough talent and challengers to expand to even 16 teams. Like we have 12 right now. That's 4 more teams. You're adding 4 more players for each team. That's like you're expecting to find 16 Mercules. That's not going to happen. Like, realistically, that's just not going to happen. This guy is a beast. Like, you're not going to have 4 more teams added in of somebody of his caliber. Like, you're just not going to have that. And I think that was what Envoy's point was when he brought up the fact that there's just not enough talent in challengers. Like, that's what he meant. He didn't mean it as there's not talent at all. He doesn't mean it as there's not people like Scrap or Ghosty or Merc, like, who came from challengers and got better. That's not what he means. He means that we don't have enough to expand to a 16 team league. We just don't. And that's what people want. People want a 16 team league so we can get back to pool play and get back to the older style of tournaments. But that's just not going to happen with the layout that we have right now. It's just not, it's not realistic. And if it does, the talent's not going to be there, like he said. So the reason I'm saying expansion needs to be last is because if you create 12 more teams of academy players, now you can start to reach into like a draft process for when like professional sports expand. It's like, okay, we can pick from all the academy teams and have like, I don't know, again, 4 teams pick from that. And then from there, everybody has to refill from like challengers up. And now you end up having more competitive teams being brought up because you're not just pulling up 4 random people for 4 more teams to play in the league. Like, you can actually have people who have been developing, you know, say over the last however many years, and constantly kind of like refilling to now create an actual 16 team league that in theory should be a little more competitive. Now, obviously we wouldn't know that until it actually happens, but I feel like that's the only time you can actually expand, because right now it's just not going to be competitive like we would want. It's going to be way more top heavy. At that point, there's probably going to be 4 teams that are like not good, just straight up not good. And we already have, or had, I should say, 2 teams that were straight up not good for pretty much the entirety of the season, if not more. So that's with a 12 team league. You know, if you do that with 16, it's just going to be way too much of a discrepancy. So that's my take. I think expansion needs to happen last. I do think it needs to happen. I think expansion would be great for the league, but like I said, you can't have the system that we have right now be what feeds into 4 more teams. It's just not gonna turn out well. And I feel like if you had the academy teams, it would prepare players a little bit more to kind of set up teams for, you know, 4 more expansion teams or however many it is that you want to expand to. Like, I don't know, but I think that would be great for Call of Duty in the end. You know, having bigger tournaments would be awesome. And I think everybody wants to see that. So I think it would take a while, you know, if we're implementing all of these steps that I just talked about. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's obviously not going to happen overnight. But genuinely, I think that's kind of like the only thing that you could really do to improve on the CDL as is. Obviously, a lot of people are going to say, well, let's just go back to CWL, or let's just go back to, you know, what we used to have. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either. I just feel like if we're going to stick with what we have, I think there's better ways of doing it. And these were some of the ways that I thought it could be better. This is something I've talked about with one of my buddies before. I love kind of just talking about stuff like this. So if you guys found this interesting and you guys have your own opinions, you know, let me know in the comment section down below, because I would love to hear what you guys have to think. If you guys like this style of video, let me know. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I know this is a different thing. We've never done this before. I'm even standing up talking into the mic, but I just thought this was something that I wanted to talk about and kind of like get off my chest a little bit, because I don't like seeing the same types of conversations being had over and over again, having these ideas, and I can't like bring them to the table. So this is kind of my way of doing that, I guess I should say. But I appreciate everybody who watched the video. Like I said, if you enjoyed, please hit that like and subscribe button, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.